what if we grounded it in a community like ours? Where this is a new community where we've just formed in really the last 2 months. We're almost at our 2 month anniversary. Uh, how would you recommend, for example, what should we be thinking of in setting up, our networks? We're in the middle, of crafting roles and responsibilities, and different roles that people are taking within the community. Some will be organizing events, other people will be maybe leading meditations or other type of sessions.
Sure.
Others will be working on structure. What can we take from your work to help direct us?
Whew, okay, so there's actually a whole lot of stuff. But let's begin with, I'm going to put it in the form of recommendations as opposed to in the form of options, because the option space is quite large. In terms of recommendations, some things that I would point out are a network design. One of the variables you can look at is the degree to which a particular node and domain, which is to say a cluster of nodes, is specialized or generalized. And so, say for example, in the military, you tend to have high levels of specialization in for example, decision making. And so the major function in an army has a very specific domain and scope of decision making, and it's very, very important that that particular node know when a decision is in its scope. If it's too big, it has to go up, but if it's too little, it has to go down, like that kind of structure. And notice what happens there is that once you've made a couple of commitments to how you're designing your network, a bunch of other stuff comes with it. Right? So if you design a network that is of the sort of a post-World War II military, then if you want it to be effective at all, a lot of energy, a lot of attention, a lot of the capacity of given individuals actually has to be focused on questions like, is this particular area of inquiry something that is right for my level of authority, or should I push it down, or should I send it up? So you may or may not have been planning on that as being part of what the time you're spending people's time on, but ultimately it's part of you have to, and so it gets smuggled in. And that's I think a thing that people miss a lot is that there's actually some natural network design clusters that once you've made a few choices, a lot of other things follow. Now, in the context of what you guys are doing, what my sense is there's kind of or three things that are happening simultaneously that may be in a little bit of tension, that may be a healthy tension. So on the one hand, I've heard you mention the word community, and it feels to me like in the tone of your voice when you say it, that you actually mean that in the sense of communitas, like a group of people who sense of togetherness or wholeness in being together.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, it may be in the monastic sense more than in the village sense, but all in directionally that way. Equally, there seems to be a sense of a raison d'être, some sort of mission or objective or purpose more than just shared values. But interestingly, that's oriented towards something which is how would I say this, singular in the domain of purpose, which is to say the religion that's not a religion, for example, in that document. And it feels like that may be a particular area of interest. And as you said, the meaning crisis, right? There is not just a calling, there's people are gathered into this community as a consequence of the bell that John has rung. But also there seems to be an awareness or intent to focus in the direction of that calling. So it's not like, hey, we all gathered for the meaning crisis, but now that it's just kind of become a barbecue. But actually a sense that there's something about this calling that has meaningfulness to it, no pun intended, and therefore should have a sensitivity or a. So again, that pulls more in the direction of a monastic community and less in the direction of a sort of general purpose where people live. If you look at the topology of monastic communities, and it's actually interesting because there's a real distinction. Villages have a different natural topology, and by necessity, than monastic communities. A monastic community has to have more formal structure. It actually has to have certain levels of certain roles that people play, and a lot of rituals that keep disciplined attention while still maintaining the real integrity of community. Like the many monks who I know feel like the level of lived human relationship and community in monasteries is much stronger than in any other place they've ever been. So this would imply orienting towards like ritual, being thoughtful about having certain kinds of ritual practices that create an ease to the discipline is necessary to maintain integrity in relationship to the purpose, while and holding, like making relatively easeful that level of rigor, so that it can then also happen in the context of community. You would also want to, because you're doing something in the domain of community that is virtual, right? We don't really know, it's not easy. Human beings naturally do communal stuff in physical space, particularly around things like food and conviviality. It's harder to do that in a virtual space because we don't have the right context and signals. So I would recommend playfully and experimentally, but nonetheless thoughtfully, making that an object of intent. So wonder what kinds of things might we do to support a deeper felt sense of humanness. Like, do we want to have, have you played Dungeons and Dragons or a role-playing game? Like have our identities have a certain level of richness and playfulness to them, so that when people encounter each other, they're already drawn into something. Like, how do you render the texture and feel of relationality that's necessary for communitas in a virtual environment? And certain, aesthetics is one possible way, and playfulness is another possible way. So that's another chunk. So I'm kind of putting in there, the toolkit includes things like ritual, and intentionally thinking about creating rituals largely to increase rigor while also increasing easefulness. The second one would be to be intentional around things like playfulness and the felt sense of expression of self into a shared space. A third, and this is now, I'm now starting to get a little bit more fluid, is how would I say this? There's a distinction, what I would say, is between two kinds of design. There's a what I might call, after my friend Forrest Landry, an omniscient design, or a propositional design, the blueprint kind, and a transcendent design, or a oriented design, has more of a feeling of intuitive or felt sense. Actually, it's not really intuitive as much as felt sense. And so I might recommend practices that orient groups of people to build their capacity in gathering a shared felt sense in themselves, enhancing their own capacity, their own felt sense, and then using the individual and collective capacity to discern rightness through felt sense as a primary mode of collective design and decision making in how the environment progresses and evolves.
That's
more.
Oh, keep on
You want me to
going.
stop?
No, I do not want you to stop. Keep on going.
So the two more that come up, and I'm actually seeing John in my mind's eye now, hearing his voice, which I can't remember her name. She's an influence of both John's and of Dave Snowden's, and one of the sort of primary thinkers in like how complex systems actually emerge, or how you can design for emergence. It has to do with sort of enabling constraints and disabling constraints. And so thinking in that way, and sort of thinking about this as having a certain necessary autopoiesis to it, is to think about how do you actually identify what are the appropriate enabling constraints and disabling constraints to give structure, while simultaneously engendering the surprise, the insight, and the creativity that actually makes it be a felt organic space.